The soldier returned to a world that believed she was a ghost, only to find her husband remarried and her son living under another name. The hiss of the bus's air brakes was a sound of finality. A sigh of steel and pressure that released Staff Sergeant Eva Rostova from one world and deposited her into another. For 12 years, her world had been the grit of Kandahar, the roar of a Chinook's rotors, the baked earth smell of a sun-scorched country that was not her own. Now, the air smelled of rain on hot asphalt and the sweet, damp decay of autumn leaves. It smelled like home. She stepped onto the cracked pavement of the bus station, the single strap of her heavy duffel bag cutting into her shoulder. The bag was a physical manifestation of the last decade and then some. It carried everything she owned, but its real weight was in the years it represented, the memories pressed into the worn canvas like fossils in stone. She had told no one she was coming. The official channels were a mess, a bureaucratic tangle that had misplaced her, then found her, then taken months to finally send her home. It was easier this way. A surprise. She pictured her husband David's face, the shock giving way to disbelief, then to a joy so profound it would break them both. And Leo. Her son. He would be 13 now. A teenager. The thought was a strange mix of terror and elation. The walk from the station was a pilgrimage through a past she had kept preserved in her mind like a photograph. The route was etched into her muscle memory. Left at the corner market, right past the old library with its stone lions guarding the entrance. Everything was smaller than she remembered, the way childhood landmarks always shrink when revisited by an adult. The neighborhood unfolded around her, a quiet tapestry of trimmed lawns and sleeping houses. Mr. Henderson's prize-winning roses still climbed the white trellis next to his porch. The oak tree on the corner, the one Leo had tried to climb when he was not quite 4, had a rope swing hanging from its thickest limb now. A wave of possessive nostalgia washed over her. This was her place. These were her streets. The quiet was the most jarring part. Her senses, honed by years of listening for the things that did not belong, the scrape of a shoe on gravel, the metallic click of a weapon's safety, were on high alert. But here, the only sounds were the distant bark of a dog and the rustle of leaves skittering across the pavement. It was a peace so absolute it felt threatening. Then she saw it. Her house. A simple 2-story colonial at the end of the cul-de-sac, painted the same familiar shade of blue. Hope, sharp and fierce, surged in her chest. She was home. But as she drew closer, the perfect image began to fracture. The lawn was immaculate, edged with a precision David had never possessed. A polished, dark blue sport utility vehicle sat in the driveway, a model she did not recognize. And on the front door, a large, ornate wreath of autumn foliage and dried goods hung like a festive shield. It was something a stranger would put up. A cold knot formed in her stomach, a familiar feeling of pre-mission dread. Situation assessment. Observe, orient, decide, act. The training took over, a cold comfort in the rising tide of confusion. She walked up the stone path, her boots making no sound on the wet slate. She reached for the front door, her fingers searching for her keys in her pocket. The old, familiar brass key slid from its place. She pushed it into the lock. It did not turn. She tried again, jiggling it, a frantic edge to her movements. The lock was solid. Unyielding. It had been changed. Her key, the one she had carried on her dog tags for 12 years as a talisman, a promise of return, was now just a useless piece of metal. The cold knot in her stomach tightened into a fist of ice. This was a tactical problem now. A breach. She circled the house, her eyes scanning for entry points, old habits dying hard. The back gate was unlatched. She slipped through, moving silently into the backyard. It was as pristine as the front. A child's playset, new and expensive, stood where her vegetable garden used to be. She knew where David always kept the spare key. Under the loose flagstone by the back steps, a spot they had chosen together for emergencies. Her fingers trembled as she pried the stone up. There, nestled in the damp earth, was a key. It looked newer than hers, but it was there. A small measure of relief warred with the overwhelming sense of wrongness. The key turned in the back door's lock with a soft click. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, into the tomb-like silence of her own home. It smelled of lemon polish and potpourri. Not David's scent of old books and coffee. The furniture was different. A plush, grey sectional sofa replaced their worn leather couch. The walls were a neutral beige, not the warm yellow she had painted herself. Her gaze swept to the mantelpiece above the fireplace, the heart of their home. The photos were all wrong. They were family photos, yes, but not of her family. There was David, looking older, his hair flecked with grey at the temples, a tired but gentle smile on his face. Beside him stood a woman with kind eyes and blonde hair, her arm linked through his. And between them, a boy. A teenager with David's dark hair and her own sharp cheekbones. It was Leo. But it was not Leo. Eva's blood ran cold. She took a step closer, her breath catching in her throat. Her mind refused to process what her eyes were seeing. A denial so powerful it was a physical force, holding her upright. This was a mistake. A misunderstanding. Then she saw the frame on the end table, nestled amongst a stack of magazines. It was a professional photograph, silver-framed and gleaming in the dim light. A wedding photo. David, dressed in a sharp black suit, was smiling down at the blonde woman, who wore a simple, elegant white dress. The date was engraved on a small silver plaque at the bottom of the frame. For years ago. A low, wounded sound escaped her lips. The duffel bag, with its 12 years of weight, suddenly felt impossibly heavy. It slid from her shoulder and hit the hardwood floor with a dull, final thud. Her legs gave way, and she sank to her knees, the polished wood cold against her skin. Her mission parameters had been simple: survive and come home. She had succeeded at the first. But she had failed to consider that home might not have survived her. The world swam. Her gaze drifted, unfocused, to the kitchen. The refrigerator was covered in magnets and papers. A school schedule, a grocery list, a child's drawing. And pinned under a magnet shaped like a smiling sun, a cream-colored certificate with an embossed seal. Her training, the instinct to gather intelligence, to know the terrain, forced her back to her feet. She stumbled into the kitchen, her hand outstretched. She pulled the certificate from the fridge. The words blurred, then sharpened into a cruel, impossible clarity. Congratulations, Ethan Miller, on your academic excellence in 8th grade science. Ethan. Not Leo. Miller. Not Rostova. The name was a gunshot in the silent house. It was an erasure. It was the final confirmation that the life she had fought to return to no longer existed. Her son had another name. Her husband had another wife. She was the ghost at this feast, a spectre from a life that had been mourned, buried, and replaced. She fled. She did not grab her bag. She simply turned and ran, out the back door, through the gate, and into the unfamiliar streets of her own town. She ran until her lungs burned and the cold rain on her face mixed with the hot tears she could no longer hold back. There was only one place to go, one person who might offer sanctuary or, at the very least, an explanation that was not delivered from behind the smiling face of a photograph. She found herself on the steps of St. Jude's, the old stone church where she and David had been married, where Leo had been baptized. Father Michael found her in the last pew, shivering, staring at the stained glass window depicting a shepherd carrying a lost lamb. He was older, his hair completely white now, but his eyes held the same steady calm she remembered. He sat beside her, not speaking, simply offering the quiet comfort of his presence. "They told me you were dead, Eva," he said finally, his voice a low, gentle rumble that did not break the chapel silence. Eva could only shake her head, the words caught in her throat. "It was 3 years after you went missing," he continued, his gaze fixed on the altar. The communication had stopped. The army sent 2 officers to the house. They gave David a flag. They held a service for you here. The whole town came. We mourned you, child. We all did. He painted a picture for her, a story of the years she had missed. A story of a husband broken by grief, trying to raise a young son who asked every night when his mommy was coming home. A story of years of silence, of hope fading into a grim acceptance. David was lost for a long time, Father Michael said. He carried a grief so heavy it was a miracle he could stand. Sarah. Sarah was a kindergarten teacher. She met him through a grief support group. She was a widow herself. She understood the shape of his loss. Eva flinched at the woman's name. Sarah. The blonde woman in the picture. She was kind, Eva. She helped him heal. She loved Leo as if he were her own. They didn't rush into anything. They waited years. They built a life from the rubble of the old 1-inch. The explanation was a series of blows, each one landing with a soft, devastating impact. It was all so reasonable. So understandable. And that was the worst part. There was no villain here. No betrayal born of malice. There was only grief, and time, and the human heart's desperate, inexorable need to keep beating. His name, Eva whispered, the words tearing at her raw throat. Why did they change his name? Father Michael sighed, a deep, sorrowful sound. That was the hardest part. For David, the name Elioe was a monument to you. Every time he said it, he saw you. He felt the loss all over again. And for the boy, he was old enough to understand you were gone. The name was a constant reminder of the mother who wasn't there. It was Sarah's idea, I think. She said he deserved a name that wasn't so heavy. Heavy. Just like her duffel bag. Ethan is her father's name, he went on. And Miller is her last name. When she and David married, she legally adopted him. To give him a mother on paper as well as in his heart. It was not meant to erase you, Eva. It was meant to protect him. To protect him. The phrase echoed in her head. That had been her job. Her entire purpose for 12 years had been distilled into a single, driving imperative: get back to her son and protect him. And in her absence, someone else had done her job. Someone else had protected him from the very thing she had become, a ghost, a memory, a source of pain. She felt a wave of anger, hot and sharp, directed not at David or Sarah, but at the world, at the army, at the colossal, cosmic unfairness of it all. It was followed by a crushing wave of guilt. Was it her fault? For surviving? For taking so long to come home? The questions were a maelstrom in her mind, tearing her apart. What do I do? She asked, her voice cracking. It was the soldier's plea. What are my orders? What is the mission now? For now, Father Michael said, placing a gentle hand on her arm. You breathe. You find a place to rest. And you remember that God's plan is not always the one we write for ourselves. She left the church and walked through the rain-slicked streets to a small, unassuming motel on the edge of town. The room was sterile, anonymous. A bed, a table, a television bolted to the wall. It felt like 100 other temporary quarters she had occupied over the years. A forward operating base for a war she did not know how to fight. She went back to the house, moving like a shadow in the deepening twilight. Her duffel bag was still on the floor where she had dropped it. She retrieved it and left, unseen. No one had even known she was there. Back in the motel room, she unzipped the bag. Inside, nestled among neatly folded uniforms and worn paperbacks, was a small, crudely carved wooden soldier. She had whittled it from a piece of scrap wood during a long, quiet watch 6 years ago. It was for Leo. A toy from a mother he could barely remember. Now, it was a relic from a life that belonged to a boy named Ethan. She sat on the edge of the stiff bed, the wooden soldier in her palm. The dilemma was a chasm before her. She could storm back into that house. She was legally David's wife. Leo was legally her son. She had rights. She could shatter the life they had built, reclaim what was hers, and detonate a bomb in the middle of their peace. Her return would be an invasion. Or she could do the unthinkable. She could accept it. She could acknowledge that the Staff Sergeant Eva Rostova they knew was, in fact, dead. She had died in their hearts and minds years ago. The woman sitting in this motel room was someone else, a survivor who had come home to find her post overrun. What was her duty now? The soldier in her screamed to take the objective, to fight for her territory. But the mother, a part of her she thought had atrophied, whispered a different command: protect the child. Even if it meant protecting him from herself. The choice became agonizingly clear. Her mission had changed. It was no longer about reclaiming her old life. It was about ensuring the stability of his new one. She had to become a ghost for real. After a long, sleepless night, she found a number for David in an old address book she kept. Her fingers were numb as she dialed. He answered on the second ring, his voice wary. "Hello?" "David," she said. It was all she could manage. Silence. Then, a choked, disbelieving sound. "Eva? Oh, God. Eva, is it really you?" The dam of his composure broke. She could hear him weeping, a raw, ragged sound that spoke of years of buried grief suddenly unearthed. They talked for over an hour. She did not yell. She did not accuse. She listened as he haltingly told her the same story Father Michael had, but this time it was filled with the painful, personal details of his despair, his loneliness, his slow, reluctant crawl back toward the light with Sarah's help. "What do you want, Eva?" he finally asked, his voice thick with exhaustion and fear. "What are you going to do?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with the fate of 3 lives. "I want to see him," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I just want to see him. From a distance. I won't talk to him. I won't let him see me. I need to see that he's okay." It was a request so painfully modest that it broke him all over again. He agreed. The next afternoon, she sat on a park bench across the street from a soccer field. The rain had passed, and the autumn sun was weak but bright. As promised, David's blue sport utility vehicle pulled into the parking lot. He got out, followed by the boy. Ethan. He was tall and lanky, with the slight awkwardness of a boy still growing into his own body. He had her eyes. The same shape, the same dark grey color. He was laughing at something David said, his head thrown back. The sound carried across the field, clear and untroubled. He looked happy. He looked healthy. He looked safe. She watched as he joined a group of friends, kicking a soccer ball around with an easy grace. She watched him for nearly an hour, a silent observer from a different lifetime. This was the resolution. Not a victory, not a surrender, but an acceptance. The sight of his untroubled happiness was both the deepest wound and the most profound healing she could imagine. She had lost her son, but he had gained a peaceful life. It was a brutal, beautiful exchange. She stood up, turned, and walked away, leaving the ghost of Eva Rostova on that park bench, watching over a boy she would never know. 6 months passed. Eva found a small apartment in a town 2 hours away, close enough to feel connected, far enough to be invisible. She got a job at a community center, working with troubled teenagers. She found that her skills, her ability to remain calm in a crisis, to see the tactical layout of a volatile situation, to listen to the silent fears behind angry words, translated surprisingly well. She was a soldier on a new battlefield. She joined a support group for veterans, sitting in a circle of men and women who were also navigating the strange, disorienting terrain of coming home. She started to build a new life, not from rubble, but from scratch. It was quiet, and it was hers. One evening, a thick envelope arrived in her mailbox. The return address was from her old house in Oak Creek. Her hand shook as she opened it. Inside, there was no letter, only a photograph. It was a school picture. Ethan. He was smiling, a faint, confident smile that was all his own. He looked straight at the camera, his dark grey eyes clear and bright. She turned the photo over. On the back, in David's familiar, slanted handwriting, were a few simple words. He started asking about you. He wants to know about his first mother. The hero. Eva sank into a chair, the photograph held tight in her hand. It was not a reclamation. It was not a return to the life she had lost. It was something else entirely. It was a door, once sealed shut, that had just been opened a crack. A new mission, unwritten and unknown, lay ahead. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt ready for it.